"Sir, can I sit with you?" The maid's toddler asked one question that changed the billionaire's life forever. Maid, toddler girl aged 3 years old, billionaire aged 30 years old. The next moment shocked everyone. A 3-year-old girl walked straight up to the coldest man in the city and asked him one simple question. He was a billionaire who hadn't smiled in years. She was a maid's daughter who had nothing but a half-eaten granola bar and a heart full of trust. What happened after that changed both of their lives forever. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you might just believe in strangers again. Hey friend, welcome back. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from today? Which country do you belong to? Drop it in the comments. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Today's story is one of the most heartwarming ones I've ever shared. It's about a little girl who didn't know she was talking to one of the richest men in America, and a man who forgot what kindness felt like until she reminded him. This isn't just a story about money. It's about what money can never buy. So grab something warm to drink, get comfortable, and let's begin. Nobody in that park knew his real name. Daniel Cole sat on the same bench every single day at exactly 12:15 p.m. Same navy shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow. Same black coffee, untouched until it went cold. Same empty stare toward the fountain in the middle of Riverside Park. To the people walking by, he looked like just another tired office worker on his lunch break. Nobody looked twice. Nobody knew that 3 blocks away, his name was on the top floor of a 40-story glass tower. Nobody knew that Cole Enterprises employed over 12,000 people across the country. Nobody knew that Daniel Cole, at only 30 years old, had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. And nobody knew that he hated every single day of it. Daniel wasn't born into money. He was born into nothing. His mother, Grace, raised him alone in a small apartment in Ohio, working double shifts at a diner just to keep the lights on. She used to say, "Danny, we don't have much, but we have each other. That's enough." And for 8 years, it was enough. Then she got sick. The kind of sick that ate away at her a little more every month. The kind of sick that a waitress's salary could never fix. Daniel remembered sitting outside a hospital room, 7 years old, listening to his mother cry quietly so he wouldn't hear. She thought he was asleep. He wasn't. She passed away when he was 8. After that, Daniel bounced between foster homes. Some were fine. Some were cruel. All of them taught him the same lesson over and over until it became a rule he lived by: don't get attached to anyone. People leave. Love isn't safe. Only money is safe, because money doesn't die on you. By 19, he was working 3 jobs and sleeping 4 hours a night. By 24, he had built and sold his first tech company. By 28, Cole Enterprises was a name investors whispered with respect. By 30, Daniel Cole had everything he swore he'd get as a boy sitting outside that hospital room. Everything except a reason to smile. His assistant, Priya, often joked that he ran the company, like a machine that forgot it used to be a person. She wasn't entirely wrong. Daniel didn't date. He didn't keep close friends. He gave large anonymous donations to children's hospitals every year, quietly, without his name attached, and never told anyone why. Some things he kept buried very deep. That Tuesday afternoon started like every other one. He walked to the park, sat on his bench, opened his coffee, and stared at nothing. He had no idea that in the next 4 minutes, a small voice was about to ask him a question that would crack something open inside him that had been sealed shut for over 20 years. Somewhere behind him, a little girl in a red dress had just slipped away from her mother's side. And she was walking straight toward him. Elena Martinez was exhausted in a way sleep couldn't fix anymore. She cleaned offices on the 31st floor of Cole Tower, the very building Daniel Cole owned, though she had no idea her boss's boss's boss was the quiet man who sometimes rode the elevator with her, eyes down, headphones in. To Elena, he was just another suit. She never looked twice either. Her daughter, Sophia, was 3 years old, with dark curls and a laugh that seemed too big for her tiny body. Elena's daycare had shut down 2 weeks earlier without warning, and with no family in the city and no money for a new one, She had started something she knew could get her fired in an instant, bringing Sophia to work, hidden in the small break room on the ground floor, praying nobody from management walked in. That day, the break room door didn't latch properly. Sophia, curious as any 3-year-old, pushed it open while Elena was refilling a mop bucket 2 rooms away. She wandered down the hallway, out through the side door that employees propped open for fresh air, and straight into Riverside Park, chasing a pigeon that had caught her eye. By the time Elena noticed the break room was empty, her heart dropped into her stomach. Meanwhile, Sophia had lost the pigeon. She stood in the middle of the path, looking around at a world that suddenly seemed very big. Then she saw him. A man sitting alone on a bench, completely still, like a statue that forgot how to move. Something about him made her curious instead of scared. She walked over, stopped in front of him, and tilted her head. "Sir," she said, in the clearest, most matter-of-fact voice a 3-year-old could manage, "can I sit with you?" Daniel blinked. He looked down at her, small, dark curls, red dress, a plastic butterfly clip barely holding on. For a moment, he genuinely didn't know what to do. He hadn't spoken to a child in years. He didn't know the rules anymore. "Where's your mom?" he asked instead, glancing around for a panicked adult. "Working," Sophia said simply, as if that explained everything. Then she climbed up onto the bench next to him without waiting for an answer, swinging her little legs that didn't reach the ground. Daniel should have stood up immediately and found a police officer. Every instinct told him to. But something in the way she sat there, so calm, so trusting of a total stranger, made his chest tighten in a way he didn't understand. "You look sad," Sophia said after a moment, studying his face the way only children study faces, without any filter at all. "I'm fine," Daniel said automatically. Sophia reached into a small pocket on her dress and pulled out half a granola bar, wrapped messily in a napkin. She held it out to him. "Here. My mommy says nobody should be hungry and sad." "That's too much sad." Daniel stared at the granola bar for a long moment. Something about it, the innocence of it, the complete lack of any reason behind it except pure kindness, hit him harder than any business deal, any award, any headline ever had. He hadn't cried in front of another human being since he was 8 years old. He almost did right there on a park bench, in front of a stranger's daughter who had no idea who he was. That was the moment everything started to change. And neither of them knew yet just how deep their connection actually went. "Sophia." Elena's voice cracked through the park like a siren. She came running down the path, hair falling out of its bun, panic written across every line of her face. When she saw her daughter sitting calmly on a bench next to a strange man, her heart nearly stopped. "Oh my God, I am so sorry, sir, I am so sorry," Elena said, scooping Sophia into her arms so fast the little girl yelped in surprise. She wandered off. "I only turned around for a second. Please, I'm begging you, don't call anyone. I can't lose this job, please." Her words tumbled out in a panic that told Daniel everything about how hard her life already was. He raised a hand gently. "She's fine," he said quietly. "She's completely fine. She just wanted to sit down." Elena searched his face, still shaking, still bracing for the worst. In her world, kindness from a stranger usually came with a catch. "I work in this building," she said, pointing toward the tower behind them, voice trembling. "I clean the offices. Please, I really need this job. My daughter's daycare closed. I had nowhere else." "I understand," Daniel said. And strangely, he meant it more than she could know. Something about her face nagged at him. A familiarity he couldn't place. He studied her for a moment, the tired eyes, the exhausted kindness, still somehow present despite everything, the way she held her daughter like she was the only good thing left in the world. "What's your last name?" he asked suddenly. Elena blinked, caught off guard. "Martinez. Elena Martinez." "Why?" Daniel's whole body went still. Martinez. He hadn't heard that name in over 20 years. Not since he was 8 years old, sitting outside a hospital room, when a kind nurse's aide named Rosa Martinez had been the only person who sat down beside him, held his small shaking hand, and stayed with him for 3 hours until someone from Child Services finally arrived. She never told him her last name back then. He only knew her as Miss Rosa. He'd found it later, buried in old hospital records he tracked down as an adult, in one of his quiet, obsessive searches for anyone connected to that night. Rosa Martinez. The only person who hadn't left him. He had spent years trying to find her, to thank her, and had learned only that she passed away nearly a decade ago. The trail had gone cold. Until now. Was your mother's name Rosa? Daniel asked, his voice unsteady for the first time in longer than he could remember. Rosa Martinez? Did she work at St. Anne's Hospital in Ohio? Elena's face went pale. Yes, she whispered. How do you know my mother? Daniel looked down at Sophia, still happily clutching her half-eaten granola bar, completely unaware that she had just led him back to the one person on earth connected to the last act of pure kindness he had ever received. 22 years ago, Daniel said slowly, your mother sat with an 8-year-old boy outside a hospital room on the worst night of his life. She held his hand until someone came for him. He never forgot it. He spent years trying to find her again. Elena's eyes filled with tears. That was you. Daniel nodded, unable to speak for a moment. She talked about that boy for years, Elena said softly, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. She always wondered what happened to him. She used to say she prayed he found somewhere safe to land. Daniel looked at Sophia again, then back at Elena, a woman working herself into the ground, the daughter of the one person who had shown him mercy when he had nothing. Life, it seemed, had just handed him back exactly what he thought he'd lost forever. And he wasn't about to let it slip away a second time. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse office, city lights stretching out beneath him, and stared at an old photograph he kept locked in his desk drawer, a faded picture of himself at 8 years old, sitting on a hospital bench beside a kind-faced woman in nurse's scrubs. Rosa Martinez. He had carried her memory like a locked box for over 2 decades, never sure what to do with it, never able to close that chapter. Now her granddaughter had walked up to him and offered him half a granola bar because nobody should be hungry and sad. He thought about Elena, exhausted, terrified of losing a cleaning job that barely covered rent. He thought about how close he had come to walking past that bench a different day, a different week, and never crossing paths with them at all. He made a decision that night. But he made it carefully, the way he made every decision, quiet, calculated, and hidden from the surface. He didn't want Elena to feel like charity. He didn't want to overwhelm her, or worse, scare her off completely. So he did what he always did when he wanted to help without being seen. He worked through channels she'd never trace back to him. The next morning, an anonymous scholarship fund for children of hospital and hotel staff, in honor of a nurse who once saved a life, appeared in the city's community foundation records, fully funded, covering full childcare and early education costs for qualifying families. Elena Martinez's name was on the list before she even knew the fund existed. A quiet call was made to the building's HR department. Elena Martinez was being considered for a promotion to Building Operations Coordinator, a desk position, daytime hours, health insurance included due to her exceptional reliability and work ethic. Nobody questioned it. Her file spoke for itself. She'd never missed a shift in 3 years, even while raising a child alone. And every day at 12:15, Daniel returned to the same bench. Sophia found him again 2 days later, running up with the same fearless trust as before. You came back, she said happily, climbing up beside him like they were old friends. I did, Daniel said, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, something in his chest felt lighter instead of heavier. Elena arrived moments later, this time not panicked, just quietly grateful, sitting on the edge of the bench across from them. The scholarship fund, she said carefully, watching his face. And the new position at work. That was you, wasn't it? Daniel didn't answer right away. Does it matter? He finally said. It matters to me, Elena said. I don't want Sophia growing up thinking things just appear. I want her to know people helped us because they were good, not because they felt sorry for us. Daniel looked at her, This tired, proud, exhausted woman who was still trying to protect her daughter's sense of the world even while barely holding her own life together. It reminded him painfully of his own mother. It wasn't pity, Daniel said quietly. Your mother sat with a scared little boy on the worst night of his life and never asked for anything back. I've spent 22 years wishing I could thank her. This is the closest I'll ever get. Elena's eyes softened. For the first time since they'd met, she smiled, not the tired, polite smile of someone surviving, but something real. Sophia, oblivious to the weight of the conversation, was busy trying to teach Daniel how to properly share a granola bar. You break it like this, she instructed seriously, so both people get the same size. That's fair. Daniel laughed. Actually laughed, out loud, for the first time in years. It surprised him almost as much as it surprised Elena. Something had cracked open inside him on that bench 2 days earlier. And it wasn't closing back up anytime soon. Section 5. Word travels fast in office buildings, even quiet ones. By the following week, a few of Elena's coworkers had noticed the change: new hours, new position, less exhaustion in her eyes. Some assumed she'd simply worked hard and finally caught a break. Others whispered theories that were less kind. Elena tried to ignore it, focusing instead on Sophia, on stability, on the strange, unexpected friendship blooming on a park bench each afternoon. Daniel, for his part, had started making time he never used to have. He moved meetings. He left the office early, something his assistant Priya hadn't seen him do in 3 years. When she asked why, he simply said, "Personal appointment," and offered no further explanation. The truth was simpler than anyone at Cole Enterprises could have guessed. His most important meeting of the day was sitting on a park bench with a woman rebuilding her life and a 3-year-old who insisted on saving him half of whatever snack she had that afternoon. One Thursday, Sophia arrived at the bench holding a slightly crumpled piece of paper. "I made you something," she announced proudly, holding it out. It was a crayon drawing. 3 stick figures stood in front of a lopsided yellow sun, a tall one, a medium one, and a small one, all holding hands. Underneath, in Elena's careful handwriting, guiding Sophia's hand, it read, "Me, Mommy, and my friend Daniel." Daniel stared at that drawing longer than he'd stared at any business proposal in years. Nobody had drawn him into their family before. Not once. Not ever. "You're my friend?" he asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer, the way a man afraid of hope always is. "Duh," Sophia said, completely unbothered by how much weight that single word carried for the man sitting next to her. Elena watched the exchange with an unreadable expression. "She doesn't let just anyone into her drawings," she said softly. "She's very particular." Daniel folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket, right over his heart, like it was the most valuable document he owned. In a way, it was. That night, for the first time in over 20 years, Daniel Cole didn't go home to an empty penthouse and eat dinner alone at his kitchen island scrolling through spreadsheets. Instead, he found himself standing outside a modest, well-lit toy store 2 blocks from his office, staring at children's books through the window, trying to decide which one a 3-year-old who cared about fairness and shared granola bars might like. He bought 4. He didn't examine too closely why it mattered so much. He simply knew, with a certainty he hadn't felt about anything in years, that he wanted to keep showing up. Not out of guilt. Not out of debt repaid. But because somewhere on that bench, without either of them planning it, he had stopped being alone. The twist wasn't just that he'd found Rosa's granddaughter. The twist was that he had finally let someone back in. Not everyone was happy about the change. Marcus Webb, the head of Cole Enterprises board, had built his career on one skill above all others: protecting the company's image and profits at any cost. When he noticed Daniel skipping investor calls to handle a personal matter 3 times in 1 month, his instincts sharpened immediately. He hired a private investigator. Not out of malice exactly, Marcus told himself it was due diligence, protecting shareholder interests, making sure their reclusive founder wasn't being manipulated by some opportunist. But the truth, buried under corporate language, was simpler. Marcus liked the old Daniel. Cold. Predictable. focused entirely on profit. A distracted Daniel was a liability. 2 weeks later, Marcus walked into Daniel's office holding a manila folder. "We need to talk," Marcus said, dropping photos onto Daniel's desk, pictures of him on the park bench with Elena and Sophia, taken from across the street. "You're the face of a $12 billion company, and you're spending your afternoons with a member of your own janitorial staff and her kid. Do you understand what this looks like if it gets out? People will say she's manipulating you. Our stock will react. Investors will panic." Daniel's jaw tightened as he looked at the photographs, candid, stolen moments of Sophia laughing, of Elena mid-sentence, of himself, actually smiling, captured without his knowledge like evidence in a crime. "You had someone follow me," Daniel said, voice dangerously quiet. "I protected this company," Marcus shot back. "Something you seem to have forgotten how to do lately." Daniel stood up slowly. For years, Marcus had been the voice in his ear telling him relationships were liabilities, that softness was weakness, that the only safe thing in this world was profit margins and control. For years, Daniel had believed him because it was easier than facing what he'd lost as a child. But he thought of Sophia's crayon drawing folded in his jacket pocket. He thought of Elena's tired, proud eyes when she said she wanted her daughter to know people help each other out of goodness, not guilt. He thought of Rosa Martinez holding an 8-year-old's hand in a hospital hallway, asking for absolutely nothing in return. "Get out of my office, Marcus," Daniel said. Marcus blinked, stunned. "Excuse me." "You heard me. And take your photographs with you. If you ever have someone follow me, or anyone I care about, again, you're finished at this company." "That's not a threat. That's a promise." Marcus left, red-faced, muttering something about the board hearing about this. Daniel didn't care. For the first time in his adult life, protecting a person mattered more to him than protecting an image. That evening, he told Elena everything: the investigator, the photos, Marcus's warning about how it would look. He half expected her to pull away, to protect herself and Sophia from the mess of his corporate world. Instead, Elena reached over and squeezed his hand. "You didn't have to tell me that," she said. "But thank you for choosing us over him." Daniel looked down at Sophia, asleep against her mother's shoulder, granola bar wrapper still crumpled in her small fist even in sleep. He hadn't chosen them over the company. He'd simply, finally, chosen himself. Marcus didn't stay quiet for long. Within days, a carefully worded story appeared in a local business gossip column, hinting that Cole Enterprises' reclusive young founder was spending significant time with a company employee, raising questions among insiders about judgment and favoritism. No names were used, but anyone paying attention in the building knew exactly who it meant. Elena found out the way most people in her position find out bad news, from a coworker showing her the article on a phone screen in the break room, followed by a room that suddenly went quiet and awkward around her. She didn't cry at work. She waited until she got home, until Sophia was asleep, and then she sat on the edge of her bed and let herself feel the full weight of it. She thought of every job she'd ever lost through no fault of her own. She thought of how easily people in power could walk away from a mess and leave the person underneath them to clean it up, literally, in her case. When Daniel called that night, she almost didn't answer. "I saw the article," she said when she finally picked up, voice flat and guarded. "I think we need to stop meeting at the park. Elena. I have a daughter to protect, Daniel. I can't have my name in gossip columns. I can't risk my job over something that started because my daughter wandered off and asked a stranger a question. I appreciate everything you've done, truly, but maybe this was never supposed to be more than a nice story that ends here." There was a long silence on the line. "You're right that Sophia asked a stranger a question," Daniel finally said, quietly. "But you're wrong about one thing. This didn't start with her. It started 22 years ago, when your mother sat with a scared kid who had nobody left in the world. Sophia just finished what Rosa started. I'm not going anywhere, Elena. Not because I owe you. Because I don't want to." Elena's breath caught. "The board can say whatever they want," Daniel continued. "Let them. I built that company from nothing, and I can rebuild whatever they try to tear down. But I can't rebuild this, you, Sophia. this feeling of actually having people in my life who aren't there for my bank account. I'm not walking away from the only real thing I have because a man who's never cared about anyone but himself is scared of a headline. Elena wiped her eyes, sitting alone in her small apartment, listening to a billionaire tell her, in the plainest words possible, that money had never been the point. Marcus is going to keep pushing, she warned. This could cost you everything. Then let it, Daniel said simply. I've already lost everyone I loved once. I'm not doing it twice out of fear. The next morning, Daniel called an emergency board meeting. He didn't defend himself with excuses or spin. He stood in front of Marcus, the entire board, and told them the whole story. Rosa Martinez, the hospital hallway, the granola bar, 22 years of searching for someone to thank. Then he said something that would end up quoted in business magazines for years afterward. If protecting this company means abandoning the one thing that made me remember I'm human, then I don't want to run it anymore. Decide what kind of company you want to be. I've already decided what kind of man I'm going to be. The room was silent. Marcus lost the vote to remove him that same afternoon, 11-1. News of the board meeting leaked, as these things always do, but not the way Marcus intended. Instead of scandal, the story that spread was one of quiet, unexpected humanity, a young billionaire who stood in front of his own board and chose loyalty to a struggling single mother and her daughter over protecting his image. Reporters who usually covered mergers and stock prices found themselves writing headlines like "The Billionaire Who Chose People Over Profit" and "CEO's Unlikely Friendship Sparks Conversation About What Success Really Means." Elena hated the attention at first. Cameras outside the building. Coworkers treating her differently, some kinder, some resentful. But something shifted when a woman stopped her in the grocery store, tears in her eyes, and said, "My son has autism, and I felt invisible for years. Your story made me feel like maybe kindness still counts for something in this world." Elena realized then that this wasn't just about her and Sophia anymore. Daniel, meanwhile, made a decision he'd been quietly building toward for weeks. He announced the launch of the Rosa Martinez Foundation, a nationwide initiative providing free childcare, job training, and emergency housing assistance for single working parents, named openly, publicly, after the woman who had once shown an orphaned boy the only real kindness of his childhood. He asked Elena to help lead it. "Me?" Elena said, stunned, sitting across from him in his office, the same office Marcus had once stood in with his folder of stolen photographs. "Daniel, I clean offices. I don't know anything about running a foundation." "You know exactly what these families need," Daniel said. "You've lived it. I can hire people who know spreadsheets. I can't hire someone who understands, in their bones, what it feels like to choose between rent and daycare. That's not a skill you learn in business school. That's you." Elena sat quietly for a long moment, looking at a life she never imagined possible just 2 months earlier, a life where her exhaustion and struggle could become something that helped thousands of other families instead of just barely keeping her own afloat. "Sophia would be so proud," she finally whispered. "She already is," Daniel said, smiling. "She told me yesterday that helping people is the most important job in the whole world." I happen to agree with her. 6 weeks later, the foundation opened its first childcare center 2 blocks from Cole Tower, bright, fully staffed, completely free for qualifying working parents. Above the door, a small brass plaque read, "In memory of Rosa Martinez, who taught us that one act of kindness never truly ends." At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Sophia, now proudly wearing a new dress for the occasion, held the giant scissors almost as big as she was, with Daniel's hand steadying hers and Elena standing beside them both. The crowd didn't know the full story. They didn't know about the hospital hallway, or the granola bar, or the stolen photographs, or the board meeting where a man chose people over profit for the first time in his adult life. But they didn't need to know all of it. They could see it in the way Daniel Cole finally, genuinely, smiled. 6 months passed. The foundation had already helped over 300 families across 4 cities. Elena, now executive director, had become something of a local figure herself, not for wealth, but for the fierce, practical compassion she brought to every decision, always asking what would actually help, not just what looks good on paper. Daniel still sat on the same bench at 12:15 most days, though now it wasn't out of habit born from loneliness. It was because Sophia insisted, every single day, that lunch isn't lunch without Daniel, and, honestly, he agreed with her completely. One afternoon, as autumn leaves scattered across the park path, Sophia climbed onto the bench between them, swinging her legs the way she always did. "Daniel," she said seriously, in the tone she reserved for very important announcements, "are you my friend or my family?" The question hit harder than Daniel expected. He glanced at Elena, who was watching him carefully, waiting, the way someone waits when a question matters more than it seems. "What do you think?" Daniel asked gently, buying himself a moment. Sophia considered this with the full seriousness of a 3-year-old philosopher. "Friends share granola bars," she said slowly. "But family stays even when you're sad. Even when things are hard. Even forever." She looked up at him with those same trusting eyes she'd had the very first day, when she'd walked up to a stranger and asked to sit down without an ounce of fear. "I think you're family," she decided. Daniel felt his throat tighten in the way it always did now around these two, a feeling he'd spent 22 years avoiding and now couldn't imagine living without. "I think so too," he said quietly. Elena reached over and took his hand, the way she'd started doing more often these past months, not as a business partner, not as an employee turned executive, but simply as someone who had walked through fear and grief and exhaustion right alongside him, and come out the other side still standing, still hoping, still here. "Rosa would have loved this," Elena said softly, looking out at the fountain. "She always said the world needed more people who stayed." "I'm staying," Daniel said, and for the first time in his life, he meant it as a promise, not a fear. That evening, at Elena's small apartment, over a dinner far simpler than anything served at Cole Tower's executive floor, but far more meaningful than any meal he'd eaten in years, Daniel watched Sophia carefully divide a slice of birthday cake, not her birthday. Just a random Tuesday, she'd declared, a celebrating day, into 3 exactly equal pieces. "That's fair," she announced, handing them out. Daniel looked around that small, warm kitchen, mismatched chairs, a crayon drawing taped to the fridge, laughter that didn't need money to exist, and understood something he'd spent his entire adult life chasing in the wrong places. He wasn't rich because of Cole Tower, or the stock price, or the 12,000 employees who worked for him. He was rich because a little girl in a red dress had once looked at a stranger and decided, without hesitation, that he was worth sitting next to. 1 year later, on a warm spring afternoon, Riverside Park looked different than it had the day this all began. A new sign stood near the fountain, Rosa's Corner, a community space for families. Benches lined a small garden, planted with flowers Elena had chosen herself. Children from the Foundation's childcare centers played nearby, laughing, safe, cared for. Daniel stood near the same bench where it all started, now holding Sophia's hand as she proudly showed her preschool classmates her favorite spot in the whole world. Elena stood beside him, no longer the exhausted, frightened woman rushing to find her missing daughter, but someone steady, purposeful, radiant with a kind of peace that hard-won happiness brings. Cole Enterprises hadn't collapsed under scandal, as Marcus had warned. If anything, it had grown stronger, its reputation transformed by a founder who had proven, publicly and unmistakably, that profit and compassion weren't opposites after all. Marcus had quietly resigned months earlier, unable to adjust to a company that now measured success by more than quarterly earnings. Daniel had changed too, in ways deeper than headlines could capture. He still worked hard. He still built, still led, still pushed the company forward. But he no longer went home to an empty penthouse. He no longer measured his worth by numbers on a screen. He had a family now, not the one he was born into, not the one fate had stolen from him at 8 years old, but one he had found, quietly, unexpectedly, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. A little girl looked at a park bench that day and simply asked, "Sir, can I sit with you?" She had no idea she was asking a broken man to let someone back into his heart after 22 years of keeping the door locked. She just knew, The way children often know things adults have forgotten, that nobody should be alone, that nobody should be hungry and sad, that kindness doesn't need a reason. Rosa Martinez showed that same kindness to a grieving 8-year-old boy in a hospital hallway decades earlier, expecting absolutely nothing in return. She could never have known that one small act of grace would echo forward through time, through her own daughter's exhaustion and fear, through her granddaughter's fearless innocence, and finally land back exactly where it started, transforming lives, healing wounds, and proving, in the truest way possible, that no act of kindness is ever truly wasted. Some inheritances aren't written in wills. Some are carried quietly in a mother's hands, passed down through generations, until they find exactly the right moment to change everything. If this story touched your heart today, that's exactly what it was meant to do. Because somewhere out there, someone needs the reminder that kindness still matters, that strangers can become family, and that it's never too late to let someone back in. If you believe that too, hit that like button. It truly helps this story reach more hearts that need it. Subscribe if you're new here, because we share stories just like this one every single week. And if someone in your life needs a reminder today that they matter, that kindness comes back around, please share this with them. Thank you for staying until the very end. I'll see you in the next story.